The French Revolution is considered one of the most pivotal events in human history for its impact in profoundly reshaping the political tides, especially of the West. At the heart of one of history's most transformative events stood a figure both respected and feared. Once known as the Incorruptible, Maximilien Robespierre championed revolutionary philosophy, but ultimately became one of its most controversial symbols. Is he a hero or a cautionary tale? Let's explore together the rise and fall of Robespierre. Born on May 6, 1758 in Arras, a small town in northern France, Maximilien Robespierre came from a middle-class family and a long line of lawyers. Maximilien would eventually follow in his father, Francois's footsteps in pursuing law, but wouldn't get the chance to learn under his father's direct tutelage. When Maximilien was just 6 years old, his mother, Jacqueline Marguerite, died due to complications after the stillbirth of what would have been her fifth child. Devastated, Francois fell into a deep despair. Whatever his motives, Francois abandoned his children, despite knowing how stigmatizing that was considered during the time. He's said to have gone on to live a nomadic and lonely life across Europe. With the head of the household gone, Robespierre's family was broken up to live with different relatives. Maximilien and his brother Augustin were sent to live with their maternal grandparents. This arrangement was seen more as functional, rather than a nurturing arrangement, likely forcing young Robespierre to learn an early sense of independence and resilience in the face of unstable support or income. Demonstrating impressive literacy skills at just 8 years old, he would grow up to eventually earn scholarships, attend prestigious universities, and later graduate with recognition for exceptional academic achievements. Once admitted to the bar, he returned to Arras and was appointed to one of the 5 judges' seats in the local criminal court. This appointment would be short-lived, however, as at this point in his life, he was apparently so ideologically opposed to the death penalty, he resigned this role. After all, that title would have forced him to sentence guilty parties to capital punishment. Instead, he pursued work as a defense attorney and earned a reputation as something of a local champion for defending the poor and criticizing the monarchy's abuses. To understand Robespierre's political rise, we need to understand how the government operated. France's social structure was broken up into 3 classes called estates. The first estate was clergy, the second, nobility, and the third were the common folk who easily made up the majority but had the least influence and wealth. The 3 separate estates would meet at the king's discretion during large assemblies called the Estates General. One such meeting was called in 1789 by King Louis XVI to allow him to raise taxes to confront the severe financial crisis France faced following several recent expensive wars and other factors. This brought focus on the notoriously lavish lifestyle of the palace at a time when the common folk were struggling to afford basic necessities like bread. Each of the 3 estates only had 1 collective vote each. The first and second usually voted against the interests of the third estate to maintain their status and power over the majority. This occasion was no different, but was particularly unjust because the clergy and royalty were largely exempt from taxation that the third estate was being subjected to. Robespierre was one of the representatives of the third estate who hoped to use this meeting to challenge the status quo. This occasion raised his national profile as a rising figure in French politics. Following his address, it was said, "This young man is as yet unexperienced, unaware of when to cease, but possesses an eloquence that sets him apart from the rest." Robespierre demanded a new voting structure that allowed for 1 vote per representative, which would give the majority of the population a more proportional say. As expected, the first and second estates voted against this change, as it challenged their power. Outraged, the third estate gave themselves a new name, the National Assembly. This defiant act effectively marked the beginning of the French Revolution and the downfall of the elite. Robespierre rose to significant prominence during this tumultuous time, largely by becoming a member of the Jacobins, a radical political club that advocated for democratic reform and expanded rights of the common people. Through the Jacobins, he built a powerful political network and became a leading voice for the revolution. In what would be known as the September Massacres, in the autumn of 1792, royalist forces threatened Paris, so revolutionary mobs stormed prisons and massacred suspected counter-revolutionaries. While Robespierre did not directly instigate the violence, he defended it as a necessary step in securing the revolution. The following November, he said, "The people in their wrath have punished the conspirators. It was a necessary act of vengeance." By now, King Louis had been imprisoned for more than a year after a failed escape to Austria. This further soured the public sentiment of the monarch, feeling that he was attempting to ally himself with foreign rulers to crush the revolution. In December 1792, the National Assembly put the king on trial for treason and other charges. The radical Jacobins, led by Robespierre, saw Louis as a symbol of tyranny and a threat to the Republic. They pushed strongly for his execution, arguing that he had betrayed the people of France. A vote was passed, the king's fate was sealed, and in January he met his demise at the guillotine, surrounded by a frenzied crowd of his former subjects at the Place de la Révolution. Until now, kingship was considered a sacred appointment, subject only to God. For a monarch to be judged and executed by his people was unthinkable. The regicide sent shockwaves through much of the continent, leading to the formation of a coalition of European monarchies against revolutionary France, including Great Britain, Austria, the Italian states, and the Holy Roman Empire. The end of the French monarchy led to the proclaimed birth of the new republic, and a darker, more radical turn for the revolution. By 1793, with the new French government facing threats from foreign enemies and internal opposition, Robespierre became a member of the newly formed Committee of Public Safety, the executive body responsible for defending the Republic. He saw this as an opportunity to implement his vision for French society. The Reign of Terror began in earnest in late 1793, as the Committee of Public Safety, under Robespierre's influence, took drastic measures to eliminate counter-revolutionary threats. Revolutionary tribunals were established to sentence suspected enemies of the state, and mass executions by guillotine became commonplace. Despite his previous staunch opposition to capital punishment that had profoundly impacted the trajectory of his career, now that those reins were partially in his hands, he became a ruthless dispenser of it. Anyone he found guilty of challenging his fledgling republic, he would see sent to the guillotine without remorse. Even the slightest suspicion was met with brutal punishment. In one illustrative example of the attitude that pervaded France during that era, Robespierre visited a farm to inspect the food supply for the Parisian people. Upon arriving, he was greeted by a particularly large and unruly pig. Robespierre, known for his austere and puritanical nature, was not amused. He declared that the pig was a symbol of luxury and extravagance and ordered it to be slaughtered and distributed among the Parisians. The farmers, not wanting to lose their prized livestock, argued with Robespierre, insisting that the pig was necessary for the farm's productivity. Unswayed by their pleas, he threatened to have them arrested for hoarding resources during a time of famine. The farmers, knowing that charge would be a death sentence, relented and agreed to slaughter the pig. This anecdote highlights Robespierre's inflexibility and his obsession with enforcing his ideals, even in the most trivial occurrences. It also demonstrates the fear and desperation that pervaded France during the Reign of Terror, as people were willing to sacrifice even their most valuable possessions to avoid the wrath of the revolutionary government. Where once he defended the poor, like this farmer, now Robespierre became their oppressor. Robespierre believed that terror was a temporary but necessary tool to purify the revolution and defend it from both foreign and domestic threats. He famously said, "Terror is nothing but justice, prompt, severe, and inflexible." With the Second Estate, the royal family, out of the picture, Robespierre and his allies set their sights on eliminating the First Estate's presence in France, the Church. In order to distance the country from the Catholic faith as well as atheism, Robespierre made a new one, the cult of the Supreme Being, a deistic faith, meaning it was based on a belief in a creator god who does not intervene in human affairs, and also maintained the notion of an immortal soul. This new religion was based on Enlightenment principles, and virtue is at the core of the doctrine. This state-sponsored belief also had a political dimension, as it attempted to use faith as a tool for social cohesion and control. Rather than private worship, the cult held large public spectacles like the Festival of the Supreme Being, held on June 8, 1794. A key moment in the festival involved the burning of a large statue representing atheism and fanaticism. As the flames consumed the statue, it revealed a hidden statue of wisdom. This dramatic act symbolized the triumph of reason and virtue over superstition and ignorance. The festival, while visually striking, ultimately failed to gain widespread support and was short-lived, as it lived and died alongside its creator, Robespierre. By now, the guillotine had officially claimed more than 16,500 lives, with the total executions in the period being estimated at 40,000. Thanks to his prominence in many of those deaths, France was opening their eyes to Robespierre's tyrannical nature. By July 26, 1794, his time of prominence in French politics was swiftly reaching its conclusion. Robespierre, with opposition steadily mounting, would try and exert his authority with a passionate speech to the National Assembly. By this time, he would finally push his luck beyond what was left of his political capital. In the nearly 2-hour address, he focused on denouncing internal enemies and conspirators, accusing them of undermining the revolution, defending the Committee of Public Safety's actions, including the Reign of Terror, and call for further purges within the convention to eliminate traitors. But he failed to provide specific names or evidence, leaving deputies aware that any one of them could be future targets should his influence be allowed to prevail. Jean-Lambert Tallien, a former ally, interrupted the address, demanding specific names of those suspected. Robespierre refused to provide any, so the convention's president, Elie Gaudet, refused to allow Robespierre to continue speaking. The following day, the National Convention, weary of his radicalism and eager use of the guillotine, with the knowledge that any one of them could be next, would vote in favor of his arrest. The next morning, Robespierre and his supporters would take refuge in the Hôtel de Ville in hopes of rallying support and even mounting an insurrection against the convention. But that support never materialized, and the convention would then declare he and his allies outlaws, meaning they could be killed on sight. Later that afternoon, troops loyal to the convention surrounded the Hôtel de Ville, leaving them barricaded inside. Outside, Robespierre's brother Augustin would be captured, trying further to appeal to their fellow radical idealists. That evening, troops would break the standoff by storming the hotel and arresting his allies. In the ensuing chaos, Robespierre would attempt escape only to be shot in the jaw, either intentionally or as an accidental discharge by one of the gendarmes stationed there that night. Wasting no time, he was taken before the convention that night, where they confirmed his identity and ordered his execution along with 22 other allies and were loaded into carts, leaving his fate decided by vote rather than by trial, as was the political reality in France at that time, which Robespierre had played no small part in. Early the next morning, July 29th, those carts arrived at the Place de la Révolution, where Robespierre had so eagerly sent many to meet their fate. While it was customary for victims to be placed face down, according to many accounts, either due to his injuries or as an act of retribution for his reign of terror, Robespierre was placed face up so that he could see the blade of the guillotine. The bandage and splint placed on his jaw was harshly pulled away by the executioner, leaving him looking skyward with his jaw misaligned and bleeding profusely as the blade fell, publicly ending his reign of terror over France and marking a relatively more moderate but still unstable time in their politics. To compare this man from before the revolution to after would sound like referencing two completely different people. One, a defender of the common man who by conscience staunchly opposed having the authority over life and death. The other, a power-hungry tyrant whose bloodlust seemingly could not be quenched. He became the elite that he once so passionately defied. Robespierre's legacy is complex. His life serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of radicalism and the natural path for revolutionary ideas to become corrupted by power. In the end, Robespierre's death bookended the revolution's shift away from its most radical phase and the beginning of the more moderate Directory period, but his impact on France and revolutionary thought remains a pivotal chapter in history. Thank you for joining me in learning about Maximilien Robespierre. Please take a moment to interact, like, and subscribe so we can grow this channel and tell you more stories about some of the most prominent figures in history. Comment down below with any figure that you'd like to see featured next, and I'll see you next time here in our humble library at Les Embers.